President Biden has dropped out of the presidential race and plunged his party into a fair degree of chaos. We may remember him as an increasingly frail old man, but what is his legacy in domestic and foreign policy? Do all political careers, like the British politician Enoch Powell once said, end in failure? Do join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
President Joe Biden has announced that he will not seek re-election in the upcoming presidential race. The announcement has sent shockwaves throughout the political sphere, prompting discussions about potential candidates who could step forward to lead the Democratic ticket.
Thank you all very much.
Throughout his political career, Biden forged a role representing middle-class Americans. Biden represented Delaware for 36 years in the Senate. As chairman of various committees, Biden had several signature accomplishments. He helped pass a sweeping crime bill that was later viewed as having contributed to mass incarcerations. Biden was intimately involved in the U.S. foreign policy as a leading voice on conflicts, ranging from Bosnia to Kosovo and Iraq. Biden entered the 1988 race as one of the leading contenders for president. That campaign quickly unraveled amid allegations that he plagiarized a speech which he ultimately said was an oversight. 20 years later, Biden joined the 2008 presidential race, but stepped out after a poor showing in Iowa. At that summer, Barack Obama tapped Biden as his running mate in large part because he needed a seasoned Washington politician who had foreign policy experience.
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
As vice president, Biden's portfolio included some of the most complicated and politically fraught issues on the president's agenda. Biden oversaw the implementation of the controversial economic stimulus bill that was designed to address the recession following the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. He also became an advocate for ending the war in Iraq, despite voting for the US invasion in 2002. Biden launched his third attempt to win the Democratic nomination in 2019. Biden selected then-Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate, making her the country's first woman, first black person, and first of Indian descent to serve as vice president.
We did it! We did it, Joe!
In 2020, Biden defeated Trump and became the oldest person to assume the office. He then had to withstand the January 6, 2021 assault on the US Capitol by Trump supporters, who falsely claimed that the 2020 election had been stolen. Now, 4 years later, as the US processes this unexpected news of his resignation, the focus now shifts to the Democratic National Committee. The coming weeks are expected to be filled with intense deliberation and decision-making as the party recalibrates its course for the future.
Our guest today is Colonel Ray Wojcik, the former military attaché at the US Embassy here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Great to be here.
We've had to change our agenda somewhat. We were going to talk about the industrialisation of the European military-industrial complex, but we're going to comment on President Biden today because it's a shock news yesterday about him dropping out of the presidential race. Was it a shock, but not a surprise, or for you when you heard the news?
I think the timing may have shocked some people, because some people thought actually this would have happened weeks or even months ago, potentially, or that it might run on at least until the convention, which is in about a month, the Democratic convention, where the whole party comes together. Republicans just had this, and so a lot of people thought it might stretch out till there. And even though there was a growing chorus of Democratic leaders that were quietly and some not so quietly urging President Biden to depart the race. There were many journalists talking before the weekend that probably this weekend something could dramatically change. So there was information in the news that this could happen, and it certainly did.
We see President Biden as an old guy fighting the laws of nature, aging, all these things that come to us all. Is that going to be the final image that rests with us with President Biden? How do you see his presidency in total, with all its nuances and light and shade? How do we judge President Biden as a president?
I think, as you know, that's a good word. It's going to be nuanced. It will be, in some cases, successful, remembered in a very successful way. And of course, it's always whoever writes the history gets to, sort of paint it their way.
Who's writing it?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, so there'll be, I'm sure, at some point, a presidential library that will try to capture all the high points and hopefully be honest about the low points in his presidency. Probably, I would assume that presidency or that presidential library would pick up his 2 terms as vice president, which are, it's significant that he served 12 years at that sort of high level,
yes.
The highest level of government when you think about it. So it will be nuanced. There's a lot of challenge that has occurred during Biden's presidency, and depending on which side of the aisle or side of the political perspective you're on, those things are attributed as Biden's fault, or from another perspective, those are attributed as sometimes those things happen during a presidency, and or in some cases, some will attribute those bad outcomes that happened to Biden as starting during previous administration. For example, the border, when you talk about the homeland, this has really, really magnified the discussion about border security during his time in office. And so he basically took the apparatus that Trump had put in place that was very patchwork and ad hoc with a lot of executive orders, and then a wall starting.
Yeah.
And he had a philosophy that this was not right on a humanitarian basis, and that he wanted to upend everything that was set up. But in such a pendulum way of opposite of all those policies, what we've had is had the most dramatic flood of migrants, illegal aliens crossing the American border. And in the last few months, a lot of discussion about many potentially with terrorist ties, and some that they're still seeking that they figured out they have terrorist ties after they crossed. So we have all this border discussion, which is now, nobody would have thought probably at this point, this election this year, that would be in the top 3 or 4. But it's actually number 1 topic people are thinking about how to secure the border,
yes.
both sides of the aisle.
And this is one of the cases, as you describe it, of the law of unforeseen consequences. If you want to do something that's positive, of benefit, it turns out the opposite.
Yes.
What is his record on the economy? We hear that the figures are good. Jobs, growth. Do you share that view of Biden as a good domestic manager? Or is it in his
I think the answer again is it's a nuanced answer.
Yeah.
So on the macro side of things, joblessness numbers are very low. Yes. The inflation has slowly started to come down. But also, when you look at based on both taxes and the inflation damage or the inflation hit that happened the last couple of years, and the prices at such a significant level, with the wages not ticking and tracking with that. So the real, depending on who's giving the estimate, the real value of the dollar has dropped for the average house. So again, depending who's talking about this, some talk about people are $2,000 to $10,000 out of pocket more annually, even though some of these macro numbers are better. So that's a challenge, because when people vote, it's not just necessarily what some economist is telling them on, hey, everything looks better. But when they look at their bank account, that's something they think about.
And what's the view on foreign policy? We see President Biden, for example, as the guy on whose watch the United States exited Afghanistan. It's a very fast pace, shall I put it. But then again, he's balanced that foreign policy defeat, if we can call that, against a foreign policy success of his support with Ukraine. So is it a patchwork of success and failure across the world?
Yeah, I think that's the case. So just going to the Indo-Pacific, the administration, I think, is doing a good job in trying to shore up new alliances or reinvigorating some alliances with Australia, South Korea, Japan. So we look at the Indo-Pacific. So, but at the same time, China is ever more aggressive in the South China Sea, especially recently against the Philippines. And then when we get back, and of course that's a #1 security challenge for the United States, which fuels the debate between the left and right in the United States about Europe. And so what we've seen since Afghanistan, many still attribute the fact that we had such a defeat, as maybe some would frame it, or such a chaotic withdrawal, that that gave Putin the last marker in his decision cycle to maybe it's okay, I'll go ahead and do my plan for Ukraine. Because clearly he was probably planning that for some time, but I don't think he just said, look at Afghanistan, let's start the plan. So now, let's talk about some positives here. On the positives, he's been able to maintain strong unity across the alliance, NATO alliance, in support of Ukraine. We transferred significant amounts of weapons and finally got the congressional movement on that funding support. So that's all in the plus side for Biden. We had the war with Israel and Hamas. That has been, again, this is a nuanced approach. The administration is trying to play both sides. They don't have a great, let's say, respect for Netanyahu. And so they want to, as they have been doing with Ukraine, which I disagree with, using what we call the 5,000-mile screwdriver to try to tell Netanyahu or the Israelis how to prosecute the war. And the same thing in Ukraine. And when I'm talking about Ukraine, I'm talking about these weapons limitations. So when they do finally get these more sophisticated weapons from us, we're also telling them, well, don't fire across the border.
Yes, what was the thinking behind that? Was it just to keep Russia as a unitary state, to stop it falling apart, because we don't want to initiate an even further escalation of the war? What was the thinking that President Biden had to limit the range of the
It's really not clear, but what's clear is the Biden administration, again, strong on Ukraine and keeping NATO together about Ukraine, but in my view, not strong enough to send the message to Russia, we want, for example, Ukraine to win. We want victory for Ukraine, not total defeat of the Russian, state, but to get the Russians out of Ukraine. That's the point. So the strategic communication of the administration, I think this will be a detractor for Biden, was weak on our role in the world in general, but also in Europe vis-a-vis Ukraine, to understand that this is an existential threat not only for Ukraine but for all of NATO or Europe, and to treat it that way. So what we've been doing with these nuanced, slow transfer of weapons and then these weapons limitations is sent the wrong signals. I think deep down, I don't know, is that yes, they don't want to be the cause of Russia failing, because maybe that they think that's worse than Russia staying together. And at the same time, this fear of nuclear escalation, which again, in my view, we have to be careful about it. But we can't just go about every time Putin rattles the saber, withdraw or retrograde our position on how we're going to support Ukraine. And the last part that I think the administration, again, strong on unity, but we had the opportunity to lay out the pathway for Ukraine to NATO. Not immediately bring them in, but set the marker that they're not only just, the future is with NATO, that's what they're saying, but it's like your future's with NATO, and here's the pathway, and you will join NATO after you achieve. Maybe it's a little different than the MAP. They called it the MAP. We were a member action plan that we used to give new allies. Sweden and Finland came in a different way. They were basically ready for NATO with all the chapters they needed to achieve. But Ukraine's in a different situation. They're at war. So I think the Biden administration will be remembered for they had an opportunity to finally turn the corner on you're in NATO, you're not in NATO, and we didn't seize that opportunity.
Looking forward to the immediate future, the elections in November. How do you envisage the elections developing? Is it too late for the Democrats to, has President Biden withdrawn too late, too little in this presidential race? Is it too late for the Democrats to regroup and choose their candidate? And how is it going to be just a very, very messy than usual election campaign?
I think it was for the next few weeks. It's going to be very complicated because when Biden withdrew yesterday, and then he endorsed Kamala Harris, the vice president, immediately or shortly thereafter. Actually, it wasn't immediate, so that already put some doubt in there. How much does he support her? But what the Democrats have to deal with, I think they've changed their convention by 1 week. They've delayed it, so it's actually 5 weeks from now. Trying to give themselves more time, and what they're trying to do is reduce the chaos, identify who they want to support, and I think where they could try to just coronate the vice president, they want to have more of an open discussion about who they want to pick. All the rules, every state runs the voting themselves, so all the rules in each state to state are complicated. They have to sort all that out by the convention. So I think we're going to see continued chaos, but much less. I think there's a big sigh of relief in most of the Democratic world that this is passed, and now they can move forward, and they have to move forward quickly. On the plus side for them, I think they're definitely going to use whoever they have, Kamala Harris or somebody else. They will turn the tables on Trump and say, hey, look at that old guy. You know what I mean? That's what they're going to turn the table that way. And then there's other issues that they'll challenge the Republicans with. But their challenge, beyond all their internal challenge, the Republicans had a very successful convention. Trump is riding a little bit higher in the water because of this, thank God, failed assassination attempt. So that gives him a little bit more of a sympathetic view by some that might not have that. So the Democrats, if they somehow turn this around and can still win that election, it will be nothing short of spectacular.
Yes, I think Harold Wilson, British Prime Minister, said a week is a long time in politics, so 4 months is an eternity. So there's still lots to play for. Thank you very much, Ray Wojcik, for coming onto our programme.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you. So that's all we have time for today. Do join us next time for How We Got Here.